Welcome to the Muscle Expert Podcast with Ben Pakulski, one of the world's top professional bodybuilders, an expert on human performance and mindset mastery. Ben dives deep to deliver the strategies of the top experts to upgrade your body, mind, muscle, strength, performance, biochemistry, and how to become the upgraded modern man. Join us on benpakulski.com to learn the cutting-edge techniques to take control of your body, your brain, and create your greatest life.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Muscle Expert Podcast. Today we're hosting Dr. Nadir Ali. He's a practicing interventional cardiologist in Clear Lake, which is in the Bay Area for a really long time. Dr. Nadir Ali and I dive into cholesterol. So keeping in mind, this is coming from a cardiologist who's been practicing for a really, really long time. And he found that the typical things that are recommended for people who are experiencing heart disease and cardiac issues were not working. And we started to look into understanding cholesterol. He started to realize that some of the misconceptions around cholesterol were just misguiding people. And he started to inquire as to whether cholesterol was actually the thing causing heart disease. And what did he find? What do you guys think? Well, you're going to find out in this awesome episode as we dive into understanding cholesterol. We talk about some very deep scientific terms, but it's not so complex that you guys won't be able to understand and apply it right away to your understanding of really how cholesterol works. And Dr. Ali's got some very behind the scenes insights into how cholesterol works and what you should be concerned with. So this is one of the best conversations I've had in a long time as far as enlightening me against what we typically believe cholesterol to be. Now, there may be some other aspects to cholesterol that we didn't discuss, such as particle size, particle number, because I thought it was a little bit complex to get into, but on broad stroke, this is the best conversation that I've ever heard anyone have as far as teaching on the misnomers, misconceptions around cholesterol, and most importantly, what you should be doing with your cholesterol if you happen to be someone who has a higher level of cholesterol, or if you happen to be a man who's concerned about heart disease, who's concerned about testosterone levels going forward. So without further ado, enjoy the podcast with Dr. Nadir Ali on cholesterol, on male hormones, and how to truthfully live your greatest life for a really, really long time in a body that you love. Enjoy. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Muscle Expert Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Pakulski, and today we are going to dive into cholesterol. There's so many misguided people out there when it comes to understanding the applications, implications, and necessities of cholesterol. People are taking statins misguidedly. People are avoiding certain foods to bring their cholesterol down. And the gentleman who's going to join me today is a world authority in understanding cholesterol. Dr. Nadir Ali, thank you so much for joining me, sir.
Well, I'm delighted, Ben, to be with you because this is an area that I can talk about endlessly.
Yeah, so you're an expert in, I'm sure, a lot of things to do with the human body, but it seems that you're leading the conversation right now when it comes to understanding cholesterol. And, even myself, admittedly, for many years as a professional bodybuilder, misunderstood cholesterol. And, we intentionally are taught that, hey, you shouldn't eat whole eggs because they're high in cholesterol. You shouldn't eat high-fat diets or saturated fat because it's high in cholesterol, and it could end up hurting your heart. Now, can you start to lead the conversation about why you just told me you've had a huge paradigm shift around the understanding and implication of cholesterol?
So I would like to give you a little background about me and how I came to this stage.
Wonderful.
I started as a cardiologist back in 1990. So that is about 28 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I became a very good interventional cardiologist. And what that means is that if somebody comes in with a heart attack and has a blocked blood vessel, then I can go in there with some tubes under X-ray guidance and open up the blockage with a stent and abort the heart attack and help patients in that way. And I became so good at it that that's what I did for the first 25 years of my life. And I would not want to see patients in my office. And the reason I did not want to see patients in my office is because I felt that I was completely ineffective in helping them. I saw that cholesterol medicines did not work because patients with very low cholesterol levels and patients who were on these medications for quite some time came back having blockages, came back having heart attacks. I saw that blood pressure medicines were ineffective. I saw that diabetic medications were ineffective. And I saw that the patients were getting heavier and more metabolically deranged. So I told my colleagues that I will spend my time in the cardiac cath lab where I can open up people's blood vessels. But I really don't want to be in the office because I'm completely ineffective. I don't change anything, I don't make them better. So I had a paradigm shift about 5 years ago, and I wanted to kind of take you through that. And so I am a cyclist, and I picked that sport up about 15 years ago, 12 to 15 years ago. And I found myself a little bit heavier than I ever was in my life, about 180 pounds at about 5 feet 10 inches. And I needed to lose about 20 pounds to become competitive in my cycling group. I was a team doctor for my racing team. And it didn't look good that the team doctor could not keep up with the team. So I am a pretty determined guy, and I really tried very hard to lose those 20 pounds. And I couldn't. I was exercising. I was doing roughly about 12,000 miles of cycling per year, about 250 a week, about 1,000 a month, if you want to do the math.
Yep.
And I was just trying to starve myself, and I could not lose that weight. So right about that time, I heard about Chris Froome. He is a Tour de France cyclist who had won the yellow jersey in Tour de France a number of years ago. And I came across his article saying that he was a low carb athlete. And that's when I heard a few podcasts on low carb, and I tried low carb. And amazingly, I lost those 20 pounds in about 6 months' time without even having to break a sweat. So when I did that, I said, hey, this is something amazing. And why have I not ever explored into this area? And why have I not advised my patients about this? And that's when I started working with patients, because this is something that worked for me. And when I started doing that, I observed that patients' LDL cholesterol, which is called the bad cholesterol, went way up, whereas many of the numbers that you would associate with good health, which is like triglycerides, which is fat in blood, or HDL, which is the good cholesterol, improved in the right direction. In addition, they lost weight, their blood pressures came down, their diabetes improved, they came off diabetic medications, they came off blood pressure medicines. But this one nagging thing remained, which is that the LDL cholesterol, which is considered to be the bad cholesterol, actually went up. And since I'm a cyclist and since I'm a team doctor, I was advising many of my cycling friends to do the same thing. And there is this phenomena which is called lean mass hyperresponder. What that means is that if there is a lean mass athlete and they go on a low carb, high fat diet, their LDL cholesterol can jump above 200.
Wow.
And that was very scary for many of my patients. It was scary for me because I was not sure whether I was doing something right by the patients. So that's when I decided to explore a little further and try to find out a simple basic question. And the question that I was looking at is that why does the body make LDL cholesterol? So LDL cholesterol is considered to be the bad cholesterol. And so why should the body be making it? And I don't know if it would shock you or no, but if you had asked me this question about 4 years ago, I would say that LDL cholesterol is all bad. It has no real role in the body, and that we should keep it reasonably low so that we are not at risk of heart disease. Would it surprise you to learn that?
Absolutely. As a cardiologist, you'd assume that most people would have a pretty good idea. I mean, I don't certainly have a good idea what the actual physiological role of. Previously I hadn't prior to looking at your stuff, but I could say that probably 99% of the people in the world have no idea what the implications of LDL are.
And that's also another tragic thing, Ben, is that if you were to ask 100 cardiologists as to why the body makes LDL cholesterol, I bet you that less than 5% of them would be able to give you one function of LDL cholesterol. So I wanted to take you through this amazing molecule that the body makes. And the best way to explain that is that our blood is sort of a water-based system.
Mm-hmm.
So a water-based system does not dissolve fat in it. Like if you take a beaker of water and put oil into it, the oil and water don't mix. And similarly, the fat will not mix in blood. So the body has to create these amazing molecules, which are called lipoprotein molecules. And basically what a lipoprotein is that it is a protein cover with a layer around it so that it can be dissolved in blood. And the core of that lipoprotein particle is cholesterol and fat. In other words, cholesterol and triglycerides.
Mm-hmm.
So the lipoprotein basically is a mechanism through which the body can transport the cholesterol and triglyceride in the bloodstream. And one of the lipoproteins is low density lipoprotein, or in other words, called LDL cholesterol. So one of the primary reasons the body makes the LDL cholesterol is to transport fat energy. Because as a bodybuilder, you would know that our body can burn fat at the level of the muscle cells. So in other words,
Yes,
it can directly take the fat from a lipoprotein particle and use it for energy. It can take the triglyceride or the fat from the lipoprotein particle and store it as energy reserves inside the muscles as well. So that was one of the primary reasons for our body to make a lipoprotein molecule so that it can transport energy to the cells of the body. Now, I can convince you that this is the case by giving you a very illustrative study that was done in healthy people. They took about 10 healthy people. I may be a little off on the numbers, but they made them fast for 7 days. For 7 days, they ate no food. They just had water and salt. So fasting is considered to be one of the healthiest things you can do for your body. And in the process of fasting, the LDL cholesterol, do you think that it went up or it went down?
Well, knowing what you just told me now, I'm going to guess it went up based on the fact that it's a fat transporter and you're probably mobilizing more fat during fasting.
I would like to challenge your audience to sometimes go and ask their physicians as to what would happen to LDL cholesterol when you fast. And I think that the majority answer would be that it would go down because they
Right.
think that fasting is healthy. And since it's healthy, you would have a reduction in the bad cholesterol. But the way our body works is that at the most, it can store about half a day's worth of carbohydrate as glycogen in the liver. After that half a day, it has no choice but to burn fat.
Right.
And in order to burn fat, it has to traffic more fat through the bloodstream.
Yep.
And in order to traffic more fat through the bloodstream, you're going to have a higher number of LDL particles. And so in this group that went through a 7-day fast, their LDL cholesterol went from about 110 to 190.
Wow.
There was a 70% increase in the amount of LDL cholesterol that fasting created after a 7-day fast. And similarly, if you go on to a low carb diet, and especially if you're a lean mass hyper responder and you are athletic, you spend a lot of energy, you're going to have to traffic more energy through your bloodstream as fat particles. So it makes sense that the body would homeostatically regulate upwards your lipoprotein molecules. So this was a paradigm shifting concept to me. And I would say that even some of the best lipidologists in the world were unaware of it or had not paid enough attention to it.
It's absolutely fascinating. Hey, everybody, I interrupt this podcast with Dr. Nadir Ali to bring you guys a special word from Thrive Market. You guys know I'm digging Thrive. I've been on there as often as I can, ordering stuff for myself and my family on this ketogenic diet. I've actually been trying some new products. So I've dived into some of the rendered fats, which is basically animal fat pulled directly from ducks, beef, pigs. I've also been doing a little bit of ghee. I've also been diving into a little bit of the pork rinds. They've got some organic pork rinds. So for those of you that are snackers, like my children, they love these things, and they're high fat, high in saturated fats. And now here's the catch. You don't want to be combining saturated fats with sugars. That's what we know is bad. We talked to Dr. Jose Antonio about that. But when you're consuming high amounts of saturated fats, it's also a good idea to consume polyphenols. So I've been diving into a lot of blueberries or blueberry extract to make sure you're getting substantial amounts of polyphenols with the saturated fats, which we know is going to really, really help our cholesterol and hormone production. So if you guys haven't already checked out Thrive Market, do it now, because Thrive is offering you guys an incredible deal. And I'm getting fully behind Thrive, because just any company with a great mission to truthfully provide you with an incredible resource of discounted food for the products you're eating anyways. The mission, obviously, to remove GMO products, mostly organic products, really, really well sourced, really well thought out ingredients and products on Thrive Market. So you can check out thrivemarket.com/muscle expert and get 25% off your first order. So head on over there when you're done, check it out, and let me know how awesome the products were. You can follow me on Instagram at IFBBBenPack and tag me in all the stuff you buy from Thrive Market. And if you do, I'll give you a shout out and I'll appreciate it. So have an amazing day. Enjoy the rest of the episode with Nadir Ali. How do we differentiate between HDL and LDL? So if we know that, I'm guessing they're both fat transporters, we all have this paradigm around HDL being good and LDL being bad. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So yes, we should do that. We should also get into some of the other functions of LDL, because LDL is a fundamental molecule and it is evolutionarily conserved. What that means is that nature has taken a lot of pains to evolve this molecule over evolution. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I was shocked about is that LDL is one of the strongest host defense mechanisms, which means that we are exposed to bacteria and viruses all the time. And one of the primary ways in which we neutralize these bacteria is through the LDL molecule. And the way it does that is fascinating. And if I can explain it, and I would explain it at a level that everybody can understand.
Great.
When you have bacteria in your bloodstream, they release certain substances in order to see whether the environment is favorable for them to multiply. And this is called quorum sensing. Quorum sensing means that I'm going to send out a pilot, and the pilot will tell me if the environment is favorable, and it'll come back and tell the bacteria and signal the bacteria that, hey, this environment is favorable, so you have reached a quorum and now you can multiply. So the neutralization of this quorum sensing protein that the bacteria elaborate is done by the LDL particle. And this is beautifully illustrated in several basic science studies. There is another beautiful study. This was done in rats. And the LDL molecule is taken up by a receptor in the liver, which is called the LDL receptor. So you can create a genetically modified mice, in which the LDL receptor works way too well. And when it works way too well, you remove all the LDL from the circulation. And by the way, we market a drug that does a very similar thing, in which the levels of LDL can be brought to a shockingly low amount of like 30 milligrams per 100 cc's. Normal levels are supposed to be a little around 100. So you can knock it way down. So in these mice who have this receptor that removes the LDL from circulation, when you give them a small amount of bacterial load, they die. Whereas if you do the same to a mouse that has preservation of the amount of LDL that would be naturally present, they don't have the risks of death. So there are numerous studies that show that LDL is a primary host defense mechanism. And that is not where its functions stop. I'd like to also talk a little bit about CoQ10, and I don't know if your audience would be interested in learning about CoQ10.
Very much so. It's definitely one of those things that, historically we're thought to have, it's one of those that everyone thinks they should take for heart benefits. I'd love to hear your opinion on it.
So CoQ10 is a cholesterol byproduct. It comes from the same pathway in our body that makes cholesterol. CoQ10 is an important cofactor that makes our mitochondria produce energy. So like, for example, the spark plug is an essential component of a car, because without the spark plug, you cannot burn fuel. And similarly, CoQ10 is an important spark plug for the mitochondria in our muscle cells, because without the CoQ10, you cannot burn sugar and fats that we use as fuel to get energy.
Right.
So when you take a cholesterol reducing medicine, you're not only reducing LDL cholesterol, you're also reducing CoQ10. So that's one of the reasons why people who take cholesterol medicines can get myopathy, muscle aches, muscle pains, muscle injuries. And CoQ10 is carried in the LDL molecule. So that is another important function of the LDL molecule. And I think I should talk about one other function before we move on and we talk about some of the clinical studies to illustrate the benefits of having a high LDL value in your bloodstream.
Please do.
One of the important functions of the LDL is to help in cell repair. So if you look at any cell in our body, it has cholesterol in the cell membrane. The cholesterol in the cell membrane provides the integrity to the cell membrane, which is the outer layer of the cell that is protecting the cell. It gives its membrane the flexibility and the fluidity for it to function well. So we have damage to our cells all the time, and repair of our cell membrane needs cholesterol from the outside. And there are numerous basic biochemical studies that have been done at the level of the cell that demonstrate that the LDL cholesterol is an important factor in providing cholesterol for cell membrane repair. So damaged cells are an important factor that can lead to malignancy. And it is felt that LDL cholesterol is one of the important mechanisms through which we reduce the risks of getting cancers and providing cell repair.
Wow.
So
that's massive implication right there. I had no idea.
So it's fascinating to me that as a medical student, rather than being just taught that LDL cholesterol is implicated in heart disease, it's important for the medical students and for the medical profession as a whole to learn that there are many functions of LDL that might be beneficial. And I'm not sure whether it is industry pressure, because cholesterol reducing medications are one of the most profitable medicines on the market, whether this type of education is not stressed upon. And after being a cardiologist for 28 years is when I'm learning this stuff, and I feel like I missed the first 25 years of being a cardiologist in terms of doing the right things for my patients.
Dr. Ali, would it be, in your opinion, that cholesterol or LDL specifically in an elevated fashion is in no way detrimental? So would we just be saying it's basically just a fat transporter, or are there some negative potential health indications in having elevated LDL?
So, as a scientist and as a researcher and as a clinician, I'd have to tell you that I don't honestly know the right answer completely. But after having said that, I'm not convinced that LDL cholesterol is the major factor causing heart disease, because this is where you get into the concept of the quality of cholesterol. So, good quality cholesterol is one in which the triglycerides in the blood, which is fat in the blood, is low. And good quality cholesterol is one in which the HDL cholesterol, which many people call the good cholesterol, is high. Because when these things are there, it implies a normal biochemical situation in the blood. And the reason that is as follows. Our body likes to keep the levels of blood sugar in the blood at a low level, and it likes to keep the amount of fat circulating in the blood at a very low level, because it doesn't want to have extra energy left in the bloodstream. So if you have a normal situation, your triglycerides, which is fat and blood, is low, and HDL cholesterol is very interesting because the functions of the HDL cholesterol simply can be stated as follows. You have cell injury all the time. There is cholesterol that is left in the milieu of cell damage. And that extra cholesterol is something that would be expensive for the body to remake, and it has to dispose of that extra cholesterol. So HDL is the one that picks up the cholesterol because it has the particular chemical structure to be able to receive the cholesterol from damaged cells and either transport it back to the LDL cholesterol so that it can be reused, or taken back up to the liver and repackaged and sent out. So that is the function of the HDL cholesterol that is probably well taught, but it should be taught in a holistic concept. So getting back to your question, is there evidence that high LDL cholesterol causes heart disease? And I would like to say that there is plenty of evidence that contradicts that view also. And the evidence that it helps, that in other words, the evidence that high LDL cholesterol causes heart disease is not as strong as you think when you factor in the concepts that high LDL cholesterol, if associated with a concept called insulin resistance. So in other words, if you have insulin resistance that leads to heart disease and you have high LDL cholesterol, what is the relative contribution of insulin resistance versus the LDL cholesterol?
Right.
And the current thinking of people like me is that if the contribution of insulin resistance is like that of an elephant, the contribution of LDL cholesterol is like that of a mouse. So that is the relative contribution between the two. But to give you some contradictory evidence, in other words, Dr. Malcolm Kendrick and a few other physicians recently evaluated previous studies that were done in which people with LDL cholesterol and mortality, in other words, dying, what was the association between LDL cholesterol and mortality? So they examined people over 50 years of age. And if I were to pose a question to my patients, they always get it wrong. And the question that I pose is that in patients above 50, if you had a person with low LDL cholesterol versus a person with high LDL cholesterol, who would live longer? Would you care to guess, Ben?
Well, you'd have to look at other factors, right? Who's going to have, like as you just said, the higher levels of insulin resistance, and maybe there's other factors involved. But oxidative stress, all these other factors. It maybe just making that assumption from one piece of data would be impossible, I think.
And those are some extremely good points, Ben. But this study was just looking at that one particular factor. Said, hey, this is a large 70,000 patient population study. We're going to evaluate whether LDL cholesterol causes people to die, people to have cardiovascular mortality. So we're going to take people with LDL cholesterol and predict who is going to die. And is it the people with lower LDL cholesterol who are at greater risk of death, or people with higher LDL cholesterol? And amazingly, it was that the risk of dying was the lowest in the people with the highest LDL cholesterol. So
yeah, reduced risk of cancer as well. So maybe that was probably a contributing factor.
now there are other studies that point to reduced risk of cancer in people with higher LDL cholesterol as opposed to lower LDL cholesterols.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that the only piece of evidence that is available? In other words, is it just the Malcolm Kendrick study? No, that is not the case. Now, there is a Danish study which is called the Hunt trial, H-U-N-T. And in this, they followed 50,000 patients. Now, that's not a small number.
Nope.
And they followed them for 10 years. 50,000 patients for 10 years. And you would predict that if you follow such a large sample, you would know whether cholesterol is harmful or no. And when you plotted for all-cause mortality, which means people dying as a result of high cholesterol, what you found is that the people who had the highest cholesterol had the lowest risk of death. And
Wow.
this was very pronounced in women. So there is plenty of contradictory information that tells that having a high LDL cholesterol after the age of 50 may actually be beneficial for you. And I don't have to stop out there. I can take you through other population-based studies. There is the MONICA study. Now, MONICA project was 2008 by World Health Organization, in which they collected data about fat intake and about cholesterol in European countries. So what we found is that the European countries like France, Sweden, and Italy had the highest fat intake compared to any other European country. And the Russian and Russian Republic countries had lower fat intake. So they correlated fat intake with cholesterol. So you're taking a higher amount of saturated fat. So countries that take higher amount of saturated fat, you would predict would have high levels of cholesterol. And that was the case. So if you looked at cholesterol levels, they were the highest in France, Sweden, and Italy, compared to countries that were eating less fat, which was the Russian republics. So now you have to tell me, in which country do you think there was a higher chances of having cardiovascular death or heart-related death or all-cause mortality? Was it the countries that ate the highest amount of fat and had the highest cholesterol, or was it the opposite?
Certainly going to be the countries who eat the lowest amount of fat.
So, yes, the countries that ate the lowest amount of fat had the highest cardiovascular mortality, and they had the highest all-cause mortality. Now, I'm going to ask you the same question about stroke rate. Which country do you think had the highest stroke rate? Now, if I can take you back for a second, France has a very high incidence of cigarette smoking. So these people smoke, they eat a lot of fat, yet they manage to remain slim, look good. But did they have a higher incidence of stroke in this MONICA project? Now, that was not the case. They had the lowest incidence of stroke. So the countries
Wow.
that had the lowest fat intake, the lowest cholesterol, had the higher incidence of stroke. So why is this contradictory information not out in the main public stream for people to understand and know?
Geez, I could speculate around big pharma and government regulations, but I don't want to go there. But I'm guessing that's probably where we're going.
Well, I think that it is a bit of both. I think that the medical school education, physician education is so skewed. It's so regimented in a traditional way of thinking that these paradigm shifting observations are not given any light. And I want to take it a little further, because if I see a patient in the hospital who has had a heart attack and I have put a stent in him to abort the heart attack, if I discharge that patient without putting him on a cholesterol reducing medicine, I am given a black mark. And
Right.
I could be subject to disciplinary action and regulations.
I suppose for the government or the education system to actually change curriculum, change what they've known, quote unquote, known for so long, they're not just going to go on a little bit of proof, right? They're going to need a definitive amount of unequivocal evidence that says, yes, cholesterol is not bad for you, right? For them to change their opinion on something that they've been advocating for a long time and go so far as to change the curriculum, they're going to need some pretty significant proof.
But
in their defense.
I guess you're right. But it also should be that there is a move in the medical profession that when you give somebody a medicine, when you do a procedure on the patient, that you get what is called an informed consent. An informed consent implies that you are talking to them about the benefits of the intervention. You're talking to them about the risks of the intervention. And in addition to that, you are taking into account patients' preferences and values. And based on these factors, you are making a decision whether you should apply that intervention or you shouldn't. So it is important that we talk to our patients and explain to them the degree of benefit from these medicines, the potential for risks, and tell them that this is medicine that they may take for about 3 to 4 decades of their lives. And we have to put into account their values and preferences and then make that decision. And
I think the issue is, Dr. Ali, is most people, typical people are looking to the doctor to tell them what to do. They don't want to think. They don't want to learn. They just want you. You're the expert, right? And they say, hey, tell me, should I be taking this? So the idea of asking them to in some way be involved in the decision-making process is putting way too much pressure on these people. People don't even want to answer questions about their health history. They don't want to answer questions about how they think they should eat. They just like, hey, just tell me what to do. I don't want to think. And because they don't want to have personal responsibility for their life or for their outcomes, right? They want someone else to own the responsibility for their outcomes. So that's why there's so much responsibility placed on the doctors. And I get it from a doctor's perspective. Like if I'm a doctor like yourself and I don't want to give my opinion to somebody, especially because like, what if I give my opinion and it turns out that something happens to them? I lose my accreditation. I get sued, all these implications. So they're just going to follow the leader, right? And that's the unfortunate reality in our culture right now is people are getting condemned for having unique thought process or, challenging the paradigm because if one person happens to die, even though you save hundreds of thousands of lives, that's coming back on you. And, it's almost like dissuading creative thinking or just dissuading outside the box thinking.
I couldn't agree with you more, Ben, that there is definitely a risk that when you are somebody who's exploring a new concept, when you are going against the grain, when you are going away from the tradition, and when you are challenging the basic tenets of your profession, that you would be subject to discrimination. But at the same time, you have to be relevant in what you do. You got to feel good about what you do. At the end of the day, you have to live with yourself. And based on all of these factors, I think that it is imperative that if you are making an intervention that the patient is going to live for 30 to 40 years, that you should take the time to inform the patients about the benefits and risks of these drugs. So, just on that subject, we can talk a little bit about when you give a patient a cholesterol reducing medicine.
Beautiful. I love that you're going to go there. I was definitely going to ask that question. Tell me, please, just keep going. Like, I mean, you're giving us incredible information.
So if you have a person who's had a heart attack or has had a stent, now then it's called secondary prevention. That means this person has already had an event and you are going to provide secondary prevention for them. So let's look at the best available data on this and see what is the degree of benefit. Because the degree of benefit is often exaggerated by the clinical studies and by the media and by the pharmaceutical industry. So the best study so far, and if you take them at face value, so I'm going to give you all of these factors. Number one is that these studies are funded by the drug industry. The drug industry collects all the data. They hire the people that gather the information. They have statisticians who analyze the differences between the treated group, which is the group that got the statin drug, and the placebo group that got the sugar pill. They have people who write out the papers that are published by the scientific media, like the Circulation, like New England Journal of Medicine, like Lancet. So in other words, there is significant layers of bias that are there in the conduct of a clinical trial. In addition, I was shocked to learn that about 3/4 of the funding of the FDA for approval of drugs is provided by the drug industry. Did you know that?
I didn't.
So in other words, the funding of the FDA to approve and and put the drugs on a fast track for approval is provided by the drug industry. So in other words,
of course. I mean, where else is it going to come from, right?
Right. So instead of somebody who is being a regulator, who's going to regulate an industry, this is not that kind of relationship. It is now a partnership. And that partnership would leave out the most important person in that equation, and that is the patient, because who is looking after the interest of the patients? But let's say that the drug industry is above board, that they don't do anything wrong, that they are unbiased, that they are scientifically rigorous, that they don't do anything wrong. And we take the best study that they put out. And if I were to put a person who's had a previous heart attack and a previous stent and give them this drug for 1 year, let's say I give 100 patients this drug for 1 year, and another 100 similar patients, and I don't give them the drug for 1 year, what do you think is the difference in terms of dying between the two groups at the end of 1 year? 10%, 20%, 30%, 1%, half a
I think
percent?
it's probably 25% or more.
So that's what you would expect, right? So if I take the best clinical trial, which is the 4S study, and you look at the end of 1 year, the chances of not dying, it's about 0.6%. So it's a little over 0.5%, and that's the best clinical study that they have.
Right.
And at the time when it was reported, a company could do 15 such studies and only report the study that it came up with the best possible data and suppress the 14 other studies.
The other ones just happen to miraculously disappear.
Right. Now, this has never been duplicated. This particular study in which there was such a dramatic benefit, and when I say dramatic, it's the 0.6% reduction in the risks of dying per year, has never been duplicated. Now, I want to take you back to Malcolm Kendrick, and I want to kind of tell you the ridiculous way in which drug companies magnify the degree of benefit. So Malcolm Kendrick says that, hey, I'm a world-class mathematician and I can increase your chances of winning the lottery by 100%. So if your chances of winning the lottery is 1 in 15 million, I could increase it by 100%. So what increase do you think that really represents? So instead of being 1
Well,
in 15 million,
in 15
you
million.
would
Yeah,
go
it's
to
1.75.
2 in 15 million. So
Right.
the difference between 1 and 2 is 100%. But when you look at the absolute benefit, it is a very small amount, because 2 in 15 million is still a very small number. So when you see a patient figure out the benefit of a drug, do you think that they are looking at the difference between 1 and 2, or they're looking at the difference of 100% improvement?
Right.
So they're really, the way the papers are written, it is a relative risk reduction, which is talking about the difference of 100% improvement, rather than saying that, hey, we have such a small improvement of less than 1%. So like, for example, there was a study which is called the ASCOT, ASCOTT, which was a Lipitor study. It was done in people who had high blood pressure. And the difference in these people having a cardiac death or having a heart attack at the end of the study was less than 1%, or about 1.1%. So they took that 1.1%, and instead of reporting it as a 1% benefit, they changed it to a relative risk reduction and published in newspapers big ads that said that you have a 36% reduction in dying or having a heart attack as a result of using this drug. So that is false marketing. That is giving people a sense that these drugs have a magnitude of impact that simply is not there. And that is the tragic part of what we do. And
So, yeah, Dr. Ali, talk to me about, this is really interesting. I mean, this is incredible information. I think one of the interesting things that it needs to be considered, I'd like to hear your opinion on, is the confounding variables, right? You get these people who come, I think your demographic would fit this perfectly, maybe not the listeners, but people who come into you and they've got elevated A1C, they've got elevated LDL, they've got decreased HDL, and maybe they've got elevated triglycerides. Now, in that situation, is basically what I'm asking, is there any scenario where taking a cholesterol blocking medication seems like it makes any sense?
so, in order to protect myself, I would say that for secondary prevention, which means that if you've already had a heart attack and that you are a middle-aged male, that taking a cholesterol lowering medicine will provide a small degree of benefit, perhaps somewhere in the range of about 0.5% improvement in the risk of dying per year.
0.6%.
0.6%.
Right.
Yeah. But would I take this medicine myself if I'm in that situation? Absolutely not. Would I tell?
So what,
Go ahead.
the ketogenic, sorry to interrupt you. You go ahead.
Yeah. Would I take the drug myself? Absolutely not. Would I sit down and have an honest discussion with my patient? Because I feel it's my responsibility to tell the patient that, look, so you're going to take this medicine for 30 years. I want you to make sure that you are observing for symptoms of myopathy, muscle aches and pains. I want you to observe that your memory is not being affected, because cholesterol is very important in memory. I want to make sure that I tell them, hey, look, I'm going to follow your blood sugar status, because when you take this medicine, there is well documented evidence in science that there is a higher or greater risks of becoming a diabetic. And this risk is maybe a 2 to 3-fold increase in risk if you look at some of the studies. So an honest discussion with a patient will always be the best option. And there are some patients that I respect their wishes, because they have this concept that LDL is bad, and I would like to respect that. And they want to take the medicine for secondary prevention, and I would work with them for that. But I would also make sure that they understand that they are observant about their body, that they are following their biochemical markers. And I think that would be the mark of an honest cardiologist, because he is going through the process of what we have been assigned to do, that is, get proper informed consent. So, sorry I interrupted you, Ben. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. You literally answered the question. Super interesting. So one of the other implications um, in this realm is you've got a lot of people who are going on ketogenic diets right now. People are going on substantially elevated fat diets. Would it be safe to assume, based on the conversation we've had, that a extremely elevated level of LDL is almost anticipated and expected, and in that case, is a high level completely acceptable? Should it be in a normal range, or would you expect on a high fat diet that it will just absolutely go up as a result of these increased fat intakes and increased necessity of fat transport?
So that's a fascinating question. And I have been in this area for about 5 years now, in which I recommend a low carb, high fat diet. And I follow patients and I see them lose weight. I see their diabetes improve. I see them getting metabolically healthy. And I have shared experiences with other people who are working in this area. Some of them are not physicians, but they have contributed tremendously to the field, like Dave Feldman, like Ivor Cummins. And I would tell you that as the person gets healthier, which means that as they are losing weight, as their diabetes is improving, as they're getting physically more active, almost invariably their LDL cholesterol is going to go up. And it's going to go up a lot more in lean mass hyperresponders, which means that if you're lean and athletic, and if you're of normal body weight, your LDL cholesterol will be over 200. So at this point, I'm not certain, and nobody can be certain whether that high LDL cholesterol is at higher risk of causing heart disease. But that is where the paradox is. And the paradox is that everything that you need to do to make your insulin work better, in other words, reduce insulin resistance, improve your biochemical markers, reduce inflammation, reduce your coagulation markers, all of these things are factors that improve your health, reduce your risks of dying, reduce your risks of having strokes. So in order to get to that biochemical state, you got to eat either in a low carb fashion, or if you are metabolically very healthy, in a paleo fashion. And both of these factors are going to increase your LDL levels. So there is a paradox at this time between insulin resistance and LDL. Everything you do to reduce insulin resistance is going to, by the design, increase your LDL levels. And everything you do in terms of nutrition to reduce your LDL levels is going to increase your risks of getting insulin resistant. So which one do you choose?
Yeah, absolutely increase the fat intake, increase the cholesterol. Now, are there any other implications or considerations for someone who's doing this high fat diet who maybe sees a high level of LDL? So maybe it's supplemental recommendations or any other things that people need to be considerate of.
So again, you have fascinating insight into this, Ben, and some of the best questions about this are asked by people who are not medical professionals.
Right.
So I am concerned when I see a person with high LDL levels, because I am completely going against my professional association, the current paradigm that LDL is bad. So I first of all explain that to the patient, that this is my way of thinking and it is not the conventional way of thinking in main medical profession. And by the way, I want to make sure that you are not put at harm's way. And so I would like to make sure that you don't have any heart disease. So one of the ways you can check and follow people is to do what is called coronary calcium scoring. So in other words, you put people in a CAT scan and they measure the amount of calcium in the blood vessels of the heart. And if you have calcium in the blood vessels of the heart, that means you have blockages, you have buildup of plaque. If you have no calcium, you have no blockages. So you have high cholesterol, you get your calcium score done, and you serially follow your calcium scores, and you see if it's increasing. If it's increasing, then that means that there is concern and that there may be reasons to change the way you are treated, maybe even consider reducing your cholesterol levels either through nutrition or some other means, but also follow the other biochemical parameters, insulin resistance, inflammation, coagulation factors. So I get patients involved in that decision making process. And so it's not just saying that, hey, you have high cholesterol, it's all good, go home and be happy. I say, yes, those are good things. I want you to celebrate the fact that you have higher LDL cholesterol, good quality cholesterol, you will live longer, you will have better memory, you have a lower risks of having cancer. But by the way, I want to make sure that I monitor this and monitor your heart.
Great. Any considerations in as far as liver health? So obviously, there's got to be some implications as far as fat metabolism and people with fatty liver. Is that going to affect, from your experience, cholesterol or fat metabolism, obviously, in any way?
So, fascinating question again, Ben, because uh, there is a condition called non alcoholic fatty liver disease,
Hmm.
NAFLD. And NAFLD is at its highest level now than at any time in history. And one of the reasons we are getting fatty liver is not because we eat a high fat diet, it is because we eat a high carbohydrate diet. Because when you eat a high carbohydrate diet, the body has to convert that carbohydrate, the excess carbohydrate, to fat. And fat metabolism goes off, and fat starts accumulating in the liver where it should not. You should have fat in your fat cells, and you should use the fat as energy to burn. You should not have fat accumulating in your liver. And the reason to get non alcoholic fatty liver disease is the conventional standard American diet, or SAD diet as we call it. And I have seen, and a number of people in the low carb community have seen, a dramatic improvement in fatty liver disease when people go on a low carb, high fat diet. So that is just a fascinating example of how wrong we have gone with dietary recommendations. And unfortunately, even to this day, if you have a fatty liver and you go to a physician, the advice would be that, hey, you need to cut out the fat, you need to exercise, you need to eat a low fat diet. And unfortunately, that's what the patient has been doing all his life that got him there. The advice should be exactly the opposite, that, hey, cut out your carbs, increase your fat intake so that you get some control over your insulin resistance, and keep the exercise going. And I have seen a number of people in whom fatty liver has improved when they go to the way of eating that that is the bodybuilders and the low carb community, prescribe.
So this may or may not be something that you are familiar with and manipulating, but I think a lot of our demographic
Mhm.
is men manipulating hormones, manipulating testosterone. Maybe they're taking estrogen blockers, and there's been some, considerations arisen,
Mhm.
speaking about testosterone and even estrogen's implication on cholesterol and triglycerides. Is that something that you're able to speak to?
So I'm not an expert at that. So I hesitate to tell you exactly what's going to happen with exogenous testosterone, especially in excess with regards to the lipoprotein profile. But I'd be fascinated to hear your side as to what you all are seeing.
Well, historically, especially actually with things like the estrogen blockers, like anastrozole and exemestane, historically HDL crashes. HDL goes way, way
Mhm.
down, and every physician or hormone replacement doctor will right off the bat become concerned. And then the next implication is always, hey, you got to get on something to control or regulate your cholesterol levels because your ratios are out of whack. That's what we always hear. And I've never seen that personally from testosterone use, but I have seen that from anastrozole use, which is an aromatase inhibitor.
Sure, that's fascinating. I'd have to look into that and see what its implications are and what the mechanisms are behind that. But I don't want to speculate and say, hey, I'm the expert on that.
Wonderful. Now, triglycerides, I know that may or may not be an area of expertise. I feel like it probably is as a cardiologist. How much of a consideration does that need to be for someone who's looking to optimize heart health and optimize longevity? Because oftentimes you hear this LDL and triglyceride conversation going hand in hand. And I just want to tie it all together so people get a view on how those two things coexist.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. I think that triglycerides are one of the major markers of poor metabolic health. In other words, if somebody has high triglycerides, low HDL, and they, by the way, they go hand in hand, it's invariably a person who is not able to burn and utilize fat. And triglycerides being high just means that there's a lot of extra energy that is circulating in the bloodstream that it shouldn't. And those high triglycerides can then get into the liver, cause fatty liver, then can get into the heart and cause heart disease. So you have high triglycerides not because you're eating too much fat. You have high triglycerides because you're not able to burn fat, that you're pretty crummy at burning fat. And to become a good fat burner, you have to reduce your carbohydrate intake. You have to improve your mitochondrial health with exercise. You have to improve your mitochondrial health by what we call as time-restricted feeding, which is fasting, intermittent fasting. So when you don't give the body carbohydrates to burn, it'll burn the fat and it'll reduce the triglyceride levels. On the other hand, if you give the body both carbs and fat to burn, it'll almost always choose carbohydrates or sugar to burn first before burning fat. So in other words, the body is a very smart system. If you're not eating carbs, it has to make its own carbs because the body has to keep a level of sugar in the bloodstream. So in other words, there's no essential carbohydrate because the body can make all the carbs that it needs. And the body is so smart that it is not going to be making sugar and burning sugar at the same time. So in order to start burning the fat, you got to stop eating sugar so that you can burn the fat and make all the carbs that you need from your own body.
That makes a lot of sense, Dr. Ali. That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. I think our listeners are going to be ecstatic about the amount of information there. Is there anywhere that our listeners can go to find out more from you? I know you've got some great stuff on YouTube. I've seen you appear some other podcasts. Is there anywhere that people can go find more stuff from the amazing Dr. Nadir Ali?
Ben, thank you. And it was similarly a pleasure talking to you. And I hope that the information that I gave would be not considered as personal medical advice, but would be considered as somewhere that people can launch from and discuss with their physician and learn on their own through their own research. And by no means is it formal medical advice. But I would love to share with you that I'm very passionate about this. And many of my YouTube videos, which I think are quite educational, can be found on YouTube under my full name, which is Nadir, Nadir, and middle name is Mir, Mir, and last name is Ali. And unfortunately, you need to put the full name, Nadir Mir Ali, to find me. I have a website which is in the process of improving. It is called Eat Mostly Fat, eatmostlyfat.com. And I have a Facebook page group, which is also Eat Mostly Fats. That's the Facebook page group. And I'd like to plug in one other thing, if I may, and that is that in Houston, Texas, where I live, which is a one of the largest metropolitan cities, we are going to be doing a low carb symposium through the University of Houston Clear Lake. And it's on October 25th to 27th. So you could put low carb Houston conference and you would get that in Google. And I would like to invite many of your listeners to see if they could come, because we are going to get world-class experts in the area of fasting, in the area of low carb diet, and both strength training exercise and endurance exercise. We're going to have people who are experts in fasting, people who are experts in vitamin D, experts in inflammation. So all these people are going to be here in Houston, October 25th to 27th of this year. And we would love to have some of your listeners come and attend the conference.
Wonderful, Dr. Ali. I'll definitely link to that in the show notes. And, maybe as we get closer to the event, we can have you back on to promote it again and give us another incredible information download from your incredibly brilliant brain.
Well, Ben, I'm really honored that you called and asked me to be on your podcast. And I hope that I provided useful information to you.
So much. It demystified a lot of the information around cholesterol because, as I said, there's a lot of misinformation out there, especially from GPs who don't understand. They're just prescribing and saying, hey, you need to go on this because this is elevated. So I'm truly grateful for the information that you've enlightened us with today.
Thank you, Ben. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. Have a great day.
You too. Take care.
All right, ladies and gents, there you have it, the cholesterol deep dive. I know my mind was blown. I'm sure yours was too. As I said in the beginning, there's a few things that we left out as being really, really scientifically oriented, like particle size and particle number. And I intentionally didn't want to dive into that stuff because I know it's extremely complex. And I promise to have somebody else on to talk about that. As we understand this one, there's going to be a follow-up to this one. And maybe Dr. Ali will be so gracious to come back and talk about the differences and what should we look at when we actually test our blood. Should we be looking at particle size and particle number, and do they matter? Because there are some other scientists out there who say it does matter. So I didn't just want to get one person's answer and have that be the end all be all. I want to give you guys a different perspective so you can learn to make your own decisions. But this guy's legit, right? For 20 years as a high level surgeon and cardiologist, I mean, this guy is the cream of the crop when it comes to understanding how the heart works. And Dr. Ali was so kind with his time and his information. So I hope you guys all appreciate Dr. Ali. And if you do, head over and say thank you to him and leave us a review, because reviews drive this podcast. And I love to see you guys interacting. If you want to interact with me, you can find me on Instagram again at IFBBBenPack, or the Muscle Expert Podcast, which is also on Instagram. And I hope you guys enjoy the show. And as always, live an amazing life. Love your body every day. And let's live a long one. And let's take care of each other. Have an awesome day.